Well, that was Hannibal. Um, this left a pretty different impression on me than most episodes this season because while it was still very good, it there were some parts of it that just contrasted so drastically, not only with other episodes but with the series as a whole. And I'll get to that in a minute. But the main theme this time around is basically are we really in control of our actions? I mean, who is influencing who? Um, and and how it's incorporated is basically continuing the storyline of Will trying to implicate Hannibal by basically luring him into a sense not only of codependency but also of undying trust. He needs to convince Hannibal that he himself is trustworthy as this fellow serial killer. Hence why he faked Freddie Lounge's death, and why he put the animal killer on display. The the museum animal killer on display in said museum. So he's creating this environment of that he talked about when he and Jack went ice fishing. Like, you need to create an environment between you and the fish, so that the fish will be subsequently easier to catch. However, the questions posed this episode were: when will the chase end, if ever, and who is really influencing who? Because the Jack is getting impatient. Hannibal is giving Will nothing except vague, pretty vague statements. Now, obviously, they do talk about serial killers, and they don't really mince a whole lot of words with each other, at least in terms of admitting what they do. However, Hannibal hasn't really issued anything that could be qualified as a confession yet. He hasn't really said anything that could implicate him, according to Will. You could probably argue otherwise, but I'm not going to get into that right now, because the show is good enough to where you don't really want to nitpick it. I mean, sure, you want to rewatch the episodes and you want to catch stuff that you might have missed, and the show obviously encourages you to think about your own personality and the personality of the characters, but you don't really go searching for things to find wrong about these episodes, which is why it was so shocking later on in this episode. But anyway, Will. Some people are starting to doubt Will. I mean, including Gillian Anderson, who returns this episode, or at least guest stars, where she basically says to Jack, do you honestly think that things are not happening exactly as Hannibal wants them to? Hannibal does not coerce people into doing things, he simply persuades them, which, again, raises some questions about Will's morality and the morality of a lot of other people. I mean, if they have... a big thing that was emphasized in this episode is people have the capacity to do horrible things. They just need to have a little persuasion, and Hannibal is the facilitator of that. And we finally get some clarity on what exactly transpired between Gillian Anderson's character and a former patient of hers. So it was nice that we finally got some answers on that front. Instead of continuously kind of leading us along, we finally got a concrete account of what went down. And it does feel like, much like in recent episodes, it does feel like the walls are closing in around these characters. Something has to happen. Some explosive event has to happen between this group of characters before this season ends. And I'm not just saying that because, the season finale is next week. No, there is really this sense of escalation in the tension going on between these three: Will, Hannibal, and Jack. So so that is remains as interesting as ever. And I'm not gonna lie, I wish they had devoted a little bit more time to Margot trying to cope with her newfound or her newly bestowed infertility, because that was a pretty macabre twist toward the end of last episode, and I don't know. I just think that they resolve it too quick. I think she moves past it too quickly. Um, I mean, if being a parent really affects our biochemistry that much, I think there should have been at least a little bit more of a period of adjustment to having that suddenly snatched away from you. But speaking of that, that's where another one of that's where another doubt comes in, because Hannibal is also creating this environment of simply between him and Will, to where they will eventually have no one but each other. I think Hannibal does love Will. I mean, not in, and it's this very sick kind of love, not quite a kindred spirit, but more like I need you just as much as you need me. And it's becoming less and less clear, particularly in this episode, who is manipulating who. Because Will basically outlines things that Hannibal has taken away from him. So that stuff, again, is very interesting. Now, what was slightly less interesting this episode was the stuff with Mason Verger. Now, I'm all for including him in the plot as a potential device to catch Hannibal Lecter. However, and I will admit that he wasn't, well, that's a lie. He was pretty over the top. He's been over the top ever since he first showed up, and I have to admit it's I got pretty tired of it pretty fast. However, he hasn't really ruined any of the episodes that he's been in. It's just his acting contrasts so largely with the rest of the performances that I just found him to be kind of distracting. However, he wasn't really as distracting this time around, and I think part of that has to do with the fact that certain scenes of this episode, basically the last 10 minutes, the last 10-15 minutes, are just so over the top. I mean, this is Anthony Hopkins level Hannibal Lecter we're talking about now. This very, I don't want to say hammy, because the acting from Mads Mikkelsen and Hugh Dancy remains true to how they've been portrayed throughout the series. It's just that the situation that they put them in, not only them but Mason Verger, is, I don't want to say overblown, but it's extreme, almost to the point of comical effect. Because basically what Hannibal does in response to Mason's rudeness and Mason's subsequent kidnapping of Hannibal Lecter, I mean, Mason tries to feed Hannibal Lecter to his pigs. He tries to get Will to kill him. Will cuts Hannibal free, and Hannibal not only feeds Verger's henchmen to the pigs, but also he takes Verger back to Will's house, puts this breather on him, and basically sends him on this acid trip. And it's at this point where the episode really goes off the rails. Like I said, almost to the point where I was kind of laughing. But I think the reason I wasn't laughing is because it was just such a departure from the very, very slow, methodical style that this show has maintained up to this point. Because this acid trip is filmed in such, the close-ups that they get and the angles that they get and the quick edits that they're doing, and like I said, the acid trip style cinematography is such a departure, and even the imagery is over the top, because he imagines Hannibal Lecter having the head of a warthog. What? And at this point, Mason Verger is just, he's he's completely lost it. He's not even trying to maintain any semblance of seriousness anymore. He's laughing hysterically. He's like, "What did you give me? You need to write me a prescription for that, Doctoro." At this point, I was like, "Oh God, are you serious?" It was just so surreal, and how over the top this was, especially in comparison to the entire rest of the series. Nothing this series has done up to this point has been this has been this extreme. And basically what Hannibal persuades Mason to do is basically slice up the whole bottom of his face into several pieces and feed those pieces to Will's dogs. And whatever Hannibal gave him, it must dull the pain. I mean, it must be like laughing gas, because Jesus Christ. And he's like, "Oh, I'm hungry. Feed me." And Hannibal's like, "Okay, why don't you eat your nose?" And he's like, "Good idea." And he takes his daddy's knife and slices off his nose and eats his nose. And he's like, "I'm full of myself." And at this point, I'm just kind of staring at the screen going, Are you serious? Am I seeing this? This is right up there with when Hannibal Lecter scalped the guy and basically cut the guy's head open where you could see his brain in the movies. Like I said, this is Anthony Hopkins level craziness. Craziness that we haven't really seen on this show before. Now, granted, it's entertaining. I mean, I'm not saying that I completely shut off the show after this, but the very over the top nature and the borderline silly tone of this last 15 minutes really left me kind of confused, because overall I liked the episode, particularly with some of the stronger stuff between Hannibal and Will, but everything with the character of Mason Verger just felt like such a departure and such a contrast that I don't really know how to recommend this one. At least not on the same level that I've recommended the other episodes. Yeah, I can't really say the acting was bad because Lawrence Fishburne, Hugh Dancy, Mads Mikkelsen, and even Catherine Isabel and Gillian Anderson were all fantastic. It's just I think Michael Pitt is the guy's name, the guy who plays Mason Verger. He was just so over the top, more over the top than he normally was. The imagery was over the top in the last 10 minutes. So where this episode really excelled was in the first two acts. It's just a third act where it goes completely crazy, off the rails nuts. And like I said, it's entertaining, but in a different way, in a way that's, I would almost argue, unintentionally funny. So yeah, if I'm judging this episode on average, it's probably the worst of the season, but it had some of the best moments. So, I mean, in terms of some of the interactions between the characters and raising some questions about who's chasing who. But man, those last 15 minutes very nearly take you out of the whole experience, if not completely take you out of the whole experience without any maybe about it. So, as always, take that for what it's worth. I mean, if you're looking for some of the crazy levels of over the top imagery and acting that you might have gotten from the movies, then this episode is for you. But I don't really think fans of the show who have gotten really used to the very methodical style of it and the very carefully poetic style of it can really gravitate towards this episode as much as others. Again, especially in the last 15 minutes. So, yeah, I can't really decide what kind of impression I got on this. Is that other than the first two thirds are golden. It's just that last third that left me kind of questioning. So yeah,